The topic 7 of the chapter is plant reproduction.
本章的主题7是植物繁殖。
Plants reproduce as to ensure the continuity of their own kind.
植物繁殖是为了确保自己种类的连续性。
In the flowering plant, sexual reproduction occurs in the flowers, which bear the reproductive organ of plant.
在开花植物中，有性繁殖发生在花中，花带有植物的生殖器官。
A flower is made up of 4 main parts.
一朵花由4个主要部分组成。
The first part is stamen, this is the male part of the flower. And it consists of 2 main parts. The first part of stamen is anther. It functions to produce pollen grains. Pollen grain contains 2 male gametes. The second part of stamen is filament. It functions to hold and support the anther.
第一部分是雄蕊，这是花的雄性部分。雄蕊由2个主要部分组成。雄蕊的第一部分是花药，它的作用是产生花粉粒。每个花粉粒包含2个雄配子。雄蕊的第二部分是花丝，它具有保持和支撑花药的功能。
The second part of a flower is the pistil. This is the female part of the flower. A pistil consists of 4 parts. The first part of the pistil is stigma, and it functions to receive pollen grains during pollination. The second part of the pistil is style. Style is the stalk that connects the stigma to ovary. The third part is the ovary. Ovary functions to produce and protect the ovule. Ovule contains female gamete, ovum.
花的第二部分是雌蕊 pistil， 这是花的雌性部分。一个雌蕊由4个部分组成。雌蕊的第一部分是柱头 stigma， 其功能是在授粉过程中接受花粉粒。雌蕊的第二部分是花柱 style， 花柱是连接柱头和子房的茎。第三部分是卵巢，卵巢的功能是产生和保护胚珠。第4个部分是胚珠，胚珠含有雌配子、卵子。
The third part of the flower is sepal. Sepal is the leaf-like structure which encloses and protects the other parts of the flower during the bud stage.
花的第三部分是 sepal 皮脂，皮脂是叶状的结构，它包裹与保护花在花蕾阶段时花的其他部分。
The fourth part of the flower is petal. Petal is usually brightly colored to attract insects and pollination.
花的第4部分是花瓣，花瓣的颜色通常鲜艳，以吸引昆虫和授粉。
There are 4 stages to accomplish plant reproduction.
完成植物繁殖有4个阶段。
The first stage is pollination.
第一阶段是授粉。
The second stage is fertilization.
第二阶段是受精。
The third stage is formation of fruit and seeds.
第三阶段是果子和种子的形成。
The fourth stage is germination of seeds.
第4阶段是种子的发芽。
These 4 stages of the plant reproduction will be detailed in the following part of the video.
植物繁殖的这4个阶段将在以下部分中详细介绍。
Now, we discuss the first stage of plant reproduction, pollination.
现在我们讨论植物繁殖的第一阶段授粉。
In the sexual reproduction of the flowering plant, pollination is the transfer of mature pollen grain from the anther to the stigma of a flower.
在开花植物的有性繁殖中，授粉是将成熟的花粉粒从花药转移到花的柱头上。
Pollination brings the male gametes from an anther to female gametes in stigma so that the fertilization can take place.
授粉让雄性配子从花药带到雌性配子的柱头上，以便进行受精。
There are 2 types of pollination.
授粉有2种类型。
The first is self-pollination.
第一种类型是自花授粉。
The second is cross-pollination.
第二种类型是异花授粉。
This two types of pollination will be detailed in the following part of the video.
这两种授粉类型将在视频的接下来的部分被详细介绍。
We first discuss the self-pollination.
我们首先讨论自花授粉。
Self-pollination only involve one parent plant.
自花授粉仅涉及一个亲本植物。
The pollen grain is transferred from anther to stigma within the same flower, or a different flower on the individual plant.
花粉粒在同一朵花中从花药转移到柱头，或在单个植物上的另一朵花。
The offspring produced have similar characteristics to their parent plant, so less variety of offspring are produced. This makes the offspring less resistant to diseases.
产生的后代具有与其父母的植物相似特征，因此产生的后代种类较少，这使后代对疾病的抵抗力降低。
The second type of pollination is cross-pollination.
第二种授粉是异花授粉。
Cross-pollination involves two parent plant of same species.
异花授粉涉及两个相同物种的亲本植物。
The pollen grain is transferred from anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower in another plant.
花粉粒从一朵花的花药中转移到另一株植物中另一朵花的柱头。
The combination of gametes from two different parents increase the variation in their offspring, and make offspring may be able to survive environmental change better.
来自两个不同父母的配子的组合增加了后代的变异，并使后代能够更好地应对环境变化。
This is the explanation of pollination.
这是授粉的解释。
Pollination of the flowering plant require pollinating agents. Now we will give explanation to the pollinating agents.
开花植物的授粉需要授粉媒介。现在我们将对授粉媒介给予解释。
Pollinating agents are the mediums, or organisms, which help to transfer the pollen grains from anther to the stigma.
授粉媒介可以是一种媒介或生物，在此它将花粉粒从花药转移到柱头。
Pollinating agents are needed because pollen grains are immotile, and thus need help to be carried to the stigma.
授粉媒介被需要，因为花粉粒不能移动，因此需要协助以带到柱头。
Four types of pollinating agents to be discussed in this section.
四种授粉媒介将在本节中被讨论。
The first type of pollinating agent is animal.
第一类授粉媒介是动物。
The second is insects.
第二类授粉媒介是昆虫。
The third is water.
第三类授粉媒介是水。
The fourth is wind.
第四类授粉媒介是风。
These four types of pollinating agents will be detailed in the following part of the video.
在视频接下来的部分，这四种授粉媒介将被详细介绍。
Now, the first type of pollinating agents, animals, to be discussed.
现在第一类授粉媒介动物将被讨论。
Pollen grains stick to the beak, or body of animals, and are transferred to the stigma of another flower. When the animals fly and alight on them.
花粉粒粘在动物的喙或身上。当动物飞来飞去并降落在另一朵花时，花粉随后转移到另一朵花的柱头上。
The flowers that rely on the animals for the pollination have the following characteristics. The flowers have large and brightly colored petals. At the meantime, the flowers contain nectar and sweetly scented.
依靠动物授粉的花朵具有以下特征：花有大而鲜艳的花瓣，花中含有花蜜，香气扑鼻。
The example of the flowers which rely on animals for pollination are durian flower, papaya flower, rambutan flower.
依靠动物授粉的花朵例子是榴莲花、木瓜花和红毛丹花。
The second type of pollinating agents, insects.
第二类授粉媒介，昆虫。
Insects transfer the sticky pollen grain from flower to flower. When it's searching for food,
昆虫在寻找食物时，会将粘性的花粉粒从一朵花转移到另一朵花。
the flowers that rely on the insects for the pollination have the following characteristics.
依靠昆虫授粉的花朵具有以下特征。
The first characteristic of the flower are anthers, stigmas are small, and compact.
花的第一个特征是花药和柱头是小而紧凑的。
The second characteristic is filaments, and stigmas are not protrude, and do not hang outside the flower.
第二个特征是细丝和柱头不突出，而且不吊挂在花的外面。
The pollen grain is small, sticky.
花粉粒是小的和有粘性的。
The flowers will produce nectar, or sugary solution.
花将产生花蜜或含糖溶液。
The petals of the flowers are big, and colorful to attract insect.
花的花瓣是大以及充满色彩的，以便吸引昆虫。
The flowers are sweetly scented.
花人闻起来很甜香的。
Example of the flowers that rely on the insects for pollination are hibiscus, sunflower, and rose.
依靠昆虫授粉的花朵的例子就包括了芙蓉、向日葵和玫瑰。
The third type of pollinating agent is water.
第三类授粉媒介是水。
With the water, pollen grain of aquatic plants are released into the surrounding water.
通过水，水生植物的花粉粒被释放到周围的水中。
Pollination occurs when the pollen grain reaches another plant of the same species.
当花粉粒到达同一物种的另一株植物时，授粉发生。
The flowers that rely on the water for the pollination have the following characteristics.
依靠水进行授粉的花朵具有以下特征。
Amount of pollen grain is large, light, non-wettable, and can float on water.
花粉粒的量大、轻、不可润湿，并且可以漂浮在水上。
Nectar and odor are absent.
没有花蜜和气味。
The example of the flowers that rely on the water for pollination are water hyacinth, Hydrilla sp, and Alodia sp.
依靠水进行授粉的花朵的例子是凤眼兰、水葫芦和伊勒藻。
The fourth type of pollinating agents, wind.
第四类授粉媒介是风。
With the wind, the light pollen grains are blown from the anther to stigma of another flower.
通过风，花粉粒从花药吹到另一朵花的柱头上。
The pollen grains can be blown for long distances.
花粉粒可以被吹至长的距离。
The flowers that rely on the water for the pollination have the following characteristics.
依靠水进行授粉的花朵具有以下特征。
Filaments are long, anthers are big, and hang outside the flower.
花丝长，花药大，并挂在花外。
Style of the flower are long, stigmas are feathers, and hang outside the flower.
花柱长，柱头大，外挂在花的外面。
The plants produce a large quantity of light pollen grains which can easily be carried by the wind.
这些植物产生大量的轻花粉粒，它很容易被风携带。
The plants produce a large quantity of small inconspicuous flowers, which do not have large, colorful petals, scent, or nectar.
这些植物产生大量小的不起眼的花。这些花没有大而鲜艳的花瓣，也没有气味或花蜜。
Example of the plants that rely on the wind for pollination are grass, corn, and paddy.
依靠风进行授粉的植物有草、玉米和水稻。
The discussion about the pollinating agent end here.
关于授粉媒介的讨论到此结束。